Imagine stepping into the gritty streets of Birmingham. The name of a notorious gang echoes through the city's history. You might know them from the hit TV show Peaky Blinders, but what if I told you the real story is far from what you've seen on screen?
None of the Peaky Blinders. This is Spark Elwood and Smallheath. We're much, much closer to town than God.
These are some of the real Peaky Blinders. It's hard to believe that a single mistake could spell the end for one of the most feared gangs in Birmingham's history. The Peaky Blinders, men who ruled the streets, eliminated rivals and held the city in their iron grip. But like all mighty empires, one misstep would bring it all crashing down. Before the dramatic TV series brought their exploits to life, this gang's rise and fall was shaped by mistakes and societal shifts. So, how did they go from being feared rulers to forgotten relics? Was it arrogance? A misplaced trust in their own invincibility? Or just a misjudgment of their enemies? Whatever it was, this one decision would seal their fate. This is the story of how the Peaky Blinders lost everything. Picture Birmingham in the late 19th century. The city is booming with rapid industrialisation, a hub of metalworking and manufacturing. People swarm here from all over, but with this growth came overcrowding, poor sanitation and widespread poverty. This environment nourished the seeds of the Peaky Blinders. For young men, the streets offered a refuge and a way to assert their identity. This was the backdrop for the rise of the slogging gangs, groups of teenagers who banded together for protection and camaraderie. But where were the police in all of this? The police were part of the problem. They cracked down on street gambling, which banned any betting outside racecourses, fueling tensions amongst the working class. According to historian Professor Carl Chin, at that time there weren't any recreational opportunities for youth. Shutting down street gambling took away from them the only form of entertainment. He said there was a large young population who had no parks, recreation centres or libraries to go to, so they would gather on a Sunday on wasteland and play gambling games. They would play games where you would throw a coin towards a mark and whoever was closest would collect all of the money. There were other rough games that they played too, and the middle class didn't like that on a Sunday, God's day. They were scared of the young people. When the police tried to stop this, the gangs emerged to fight back against them, and that's how they started. The police were more enforcers than protectors. For the working class, the gangs provided a sense of belonging and security, but they also brought violence and crime, clashing with rival groups to defend their territories. Another driving force behind the rise of these gangs was the intense rivalry between the Irish immigrants and the native Birmingham population. After the Great Famine of the 1840s, Irish immigrants arrived in large numbers, seeking work and a better life. By the mid-19th century, Birmingham had a significant Irish population, concentrated in the poorest parts of the city. This influx led to tensions, with locals viewing the Irish as a threat to their jobs and way of life. Anti-Irish sentiment, fueled by figures like preacher William Murphy, culminated in the Murphy riots of 1867. Mobs looted Irish neighbourhoods, and the police often sided with the attackers. In response, many young Irishmen joined the slogging gangs to defend their communities. Now, you might expect the Peaky Blinders to be one of these gangs, but here's the truth. That's the biggest misconception. The Peaky Blinders weren't a single entity, but a collection of gangs operating across Birmingham. One of the first of these gangs was led by Thomas Joyce, a labourer whose parents had settled in Birmingham after fleeing the famine in Ireland. Joyce, like many of his peers, grew up in extreme poverty and witnessed the destruction of his community during the Murphy riots. His gang, known for its fierce loyalty and willingness to fight, became one of the most feared in Birmingham. Joyce's story is a microcosm of the wider social issues facing Birmingham at the time, issues that would ultimately give rise to the Peaky Blinders. The name Peaky Blinders didn't emerge until the 1890s, but the foundations were laid earlier. The gangs of the 1870s and 1880s were territorial, with each group controlling a specific part of the city. They wore distinctive clothing, often with brightly coloured scarves and flat caps, which set them apart from the respectable working class. The caps, with their distinctive peaks, would later give the Peaky Blinders their name. These early gangs were not yet the organised crime syndicates that the Peaky Blinders would later become. They were more concerned with defending their turf and proving their toughness than with making money. But as the years went on and the members of these gangs grew older, they began to see the potential for profit in their activities. Illegal gambling, especially street betting, became a key income source and led to conflicts, both with the law and rival gangs. This brought them into conflict with not only the law, but also with each other, as different groups vied for control of the most lucrative territories. As Professor Carl Chin points out, these early gangs were the predecessors of the Peaky Blinders, setting the stage for the more organised and ruthless operations that would follow. So how exactly did these slogging gangs gradually evolve into the notorious Peaky Blinders? The lack of effective law enforcement allowed these gangs to flourish unchecked, while the low wages and harsh living conditions pushed many youths into joining their ranks. This led to an increase in street violence and disorder as these gangs sought to assert their dominance over the city. The early years of the Peaky Blinders saw a gradual transformation from loosely organised slogging gangs to a more structured and feared criminal entity, making their mark on Birmingham's underworld. Initially, their activities were relatively small scale, focused on local disputes and petty crimes. However, as they grew in size and influence, their ambitions expanded. They began to exert control over larger areas of Birmingham, using intimidation and violence to maintain their dominance. This evolution was not just as a result of their own efforts, but also a reflection of the changing social landscapes of the city. As Birmingham grew and industrialised further, the opportunities for criminal enterprise expanded, and the Peaky Blinders were quick to capitalise on these opportunities. The popular TV series Peaky Blinders has captured the imagination of audiences worldwide, depicting a glamorous and ruthless gang that rises to power in post-World War I Birmingham. However, the real Peaky Blinders, active in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, were far from the sophisticated criminals portrayed on screen.
I asked my men to steal me 4 bikes with petrol engines. They picked up the wrong fucking crate.
So that's why they sent a copper from Belfast.
Maybe, maybe not.
Thomas, you're a bookmaker, a robber, a fighting man. You're not a fool. You sell those guns to anyone, you will hang.
Crown of a prince. Soon to be king, I'd bet.
Selling weapons, being a bookie, and trying to deceive the crown all in one go. That's a high level of sophistication, but alas not found in the real world Peaky Blinders. One of the most popular myths popularised by the series is the notion that the Peaky Blinders sewed razor blades into the peaks of their caps to use as weapons. That's quite some impression, right? A stylish and deadly accessory, but sadly, this iconic symbol is inaccurate. As Professor Carl Chin, author of The Real Peaky Blinders, says, disposable razor blades were a luxury item in the 19th century. They were not mass-produced until the early 20th century, which makes it highly unlikely for a working-class gang to have access to them. Furthermore, the practicality of such weapons is also questionable. A flat cap is soft and pliable, and even if a blade were sewn into the peak, it would be difficult to use effectively in a fight. The myth of the razor blade cap likely emerged to strengthen the gang's already fearsome reputation. Another myth about the Peaky Blinders is that they were a well-organised crime syndicate. They were in reality a collection of loosely affiliated street gangs. Unlike the fictional Shelby family, who operate a vast and complex criminal enterprise, the real Peaky Blinders were much more focused on asserting dominance within their local neighbourhoods. Their primary goal was not to gather wealth or power on a grand scale, but to gain respect and control of their immediate environment. However, one thing the show and other accounts got right is their stylish dress, but not the one depicted in the TV show. The Peaky Blinders wore bell-bottom trousers, leather boots and silk scarves. They also wore a billycock hat, a type of bowler hat popular among working-class men at the time. The term Peaky Blinder is likely referred to the way they tilted the peak of their hats over one eye, apparently to hide their identity from victims. The real Peaky Blinders were known for their brutal and indiscriminate violence. They preyed on the very communities they lived in, targeting not only rival gangs and the police, but also ordinary working class citizens. Professor Chin describes them as vicious backstreet thugs, who were more interested in displaying their fighting prowess than any form of organised criminal activity. They would use belts with heavy buckles, metal-tipped boots, and even knives to attack their victims, often leaving them severely injured. Their level of sophistication is another misconception. Contrary to many people's beliefs, the Peaky Blinders were not strategic thinkers who carefully planned their moves or engaged in complex schemes to expand their power, but they were much more opportunistic in their approach. Their crimes were often impulsive and driven by the need to assert dominance or settle scores. They were more concerned with immediate gratification, whether that was through theft, violence, or simply showing off their tough reputation. This really throws cold water onto people's awe of the Peaky Blinders. Here's a few thoughts by Professor Chin as well. He's right, don't you think? Violence should never be admired, in any form. Professor Chin has been vocal about the historical inaccuracies in the Peaky Blinders series, emphasising that while the show has brought attention to an important part of Birmingham's history, it has also glamorised a group of men who were, in reality, far from admirable. He acknowledges that the series has been a success and has sparked interest in the history of Birmingham, but is also quick to point out that the romanticisation of the gangsters' lives can lead to a distorted understanding of history. The real Peaky Blinders were not noble outlaws fighting against a corrupt system, but rather violent criminals who exploited their own communities for personal gain.
The only thing that they could say they were best at was fighting, and that their street was harder than the next street. So again, I'm not seeking to excuse it, but I wanted to understand it. It's a more physical society, the police are seen as an enemy, and hardness is something that is valued. It's still there, perhaps not as widespread as it was, but it's still there. So it's that loyalty to the street, which is where your family live, where your friends are, against the next street or the street 2 streets down. And so all these factors are coming together. I suppose the term that people use today is toxic masculinity and street loyalty and poverty and hardship. Now that's not to say that all poor...
As Professor Chin highlights, the circumstances that gave rise to the Peaky Blinders and many other gangs in Birmingham, you should know that the Peaky Blinders' rise to notoriety was not a simple process. It was marked by a combination of illegal enterprises, violent enforcement of their will, and the peculiar role that the media played in their transformation into local celebrities. One of the key elements that fueled the Peaky Blinders' ascent into the criminal hierarchy was their involvement in illegal gambling. Gambling, especially street betting, was a popular pastime amongst the working class, but it was heavily policed due to its association with public disorder. The Peaky Blinders capitalised on this by running illegal betting operations, which quickly became one of their main sources of income. They used violence to control gambling operations and silence rivals. According to historian Professor Carl Chin, the Peaky Blinders were not just opportunistic, they were methodical in their approach. They understood the economic desperation of the people around them and exploited it, ensuring that even those who engaged in small-time gambling were under their control. In addition to gambling, the Peaky Blinders were also involved in money laundering. The proceeds from their illegal activities had to be cleaned before they could be used without raising suspicion. They did this by setting up legitimate businesses, often small shops or bars, where the illegal money could be filtered into the economy. This practice allowed them to maintain a facade of respectability while continuing their criminal operations in the background. An unexpected but crucial factor in the Peaky Blinders' rise to notoriety was the role of the media. Newspapers of the time, keen on sensational stories, began to report on the gang's activities with increasing frequency. The term Peaky Blinders itself became a kind of brand, synonymous with the rough and ready life of Birmingham's underworld. Increasingly, this media attention did more than just report the gang's activities, it amplified their reputation. Headlines about their exploits, arrests, and confrontations with the law transformed the Peaky Blinders from mere criminals into notorious figures. The public, particularly those living far from Birmingham, began to see them as larger-than-life characters. This notoriety was a double-edged sword. While it increased their influence and power, it also attracted the attention of law enforcement. which would eventually contribute to their downfall. The media's portrayal often bordered on glamorisation, depicting the gang in ways that both fascinated and terrified the public. This portrayal fed into the myth of the Peaky Blinders as more than just thugs. They were seen as a symbol of rebellion against the social and economic constraints of the time. However, as Professor Chin points out, the perception was far removed from reality. The Peaky Blinders were not fighting for any noble cause. They were simply exploiting the conditions of their time to their advantage. Police records show some real-life Peaky Blinders. Harry Fowler, a baby-faced criminal who was 19 when this mugshot was taken. Basic information about the youth, who was born in 1885, is recorded. The note stated he had light brown hair, grey eyes and a pale composition. It also listed a round scar on his left cheek as a distinctive feature. He gave his occupation as barman, but police caught up with him thanks to his membership of the Peaky Blinders. The charge sheet, which dates from October the 5th, 1904, said Fowler had been taken in for stealing a bicycle. It also noted that he was given 1 month in prison for the offence. Ernest Bales. He was listed as a co-prisoner with Fowler, taken in for the same crime of stealing a bicycle, which was left unattended outside a factory for just 4 minutes when the larcenous pair laid their hands on it. They were spotted almost immediately afterwards, trying to make easy money selling it on the street. The sheets show that Bales, born in 1885, was also 19. He received 2 months in prison for the theft. Stephen McHickey. He was 24 when listed in the police records. The youth had black hair, brown eyes and a sallow complexion. This one's record shows a distinctive and interesting feature. He had tattoos of a woman on both his left and right arms, one of whom was labelled Louisa. McHickey said he was a metal roller by occupation, but was recorded on October the 24th, 1904 as having broken into a shop, reportedly a draper's just a few doors down the road from his own home. For his crime, the record states he received 8 months behind bars. Thomas Gilbert was the final entrant into this row of entries. He was 38 at the time of the record, significantly older than the other Peaky Blinders listed on the record. The bald man was listed as having brown eyes and also brown hair. The record says Gilbert, who said he was a fishmonger, had missing fingers and a distinctive mark on his right knee. He was charged on the 18th of October 1904 and his crime is listed as false pretences, perhaps suggesting he was not involved with more physical crimes like the younger gang members. However, the only individual to be officially branded a Peaky Blinder was Henry Lightfoot, a hardened criminal born in 1873. The Peaky Blinders' reign in Birmingham was marked by frequent and intense confrontations with the police. As the gang grew in power and notoriety, their clashes with law enforcement became more pronounced. Initially, the police struggled to effectively counter the organised crime of the Peaky Blinders. Their methods were often reactive rather than proactive, which allowed the gang to continue its illegal activities with relative ease. The turning point came with the efforts of key figures such as Charles Houghton Rafter, who became a prominent leader in the fight against gang violence. Rafter was appointed as Chief Constable of the force in 1899 and known for his determination and strategic approach. He embarked on a rapid recruitment campaign of fit young men. According to Chin, Birmingham police asked 3 things of recruits: can you read, can you write, can you fight? They needed to have a certain standard of education, but also needed to be tough lads with lots of physical training. Now, instead of one police officer alone in a tough area, there was a double beat. They needed to be strong because there was literally a battle going on in the back streets. This in turn led the public to have more faith in the police and gave witness statements for crimes they would have previously denied knowledge of before out of fear. Another thing that came as a blow to the Peaky Blinders was the crackdown on illegal gambling dens, which was central to the Peaky Blinders' revenue. The raids on these establishments were pivotal in curbing the gang's financial resources. The broader social and economic context also played a role in shaping these efforts. Birmingham's economic challenges, including high unemployment rates and poor living conditions, were contributing factors to the rise of the gangs. By addressing these socio-economic issues through community programs and activism, there was a concerted effort to tackle the root causes of gang involvement. The decline of the Peaky Blinders once a dominant force in Birmingham's criminal underworld, can be traced to a series of critical missteps and escalating pressures. The gang's eventual downfall was only partly because of law enforcement actions or rival gang activities, but rather a complex interplay of increased external scrutiny, internal conflicts, and shifting public perceptions. One of the pivotal mistakes made by the Peaky Blinders was their failure to adapt to the intensified law enforcement efforts against them. As previously mentioned, key figures like Charles Houghton Rafter spearheaded more aggressive strategies to dismantle the gang's operations. The increased police pressure, coupled with more sophisticated investigative techniques, began to erode the Peaky Blinders' ability to operate with the same level of impunity. Raids on illegal gambling dens, surveillance operations, and undercover investigations became more frequent and effective, disrupting the gang's criminal activities and undermining their financial stability. Moreover, the community's response to the gang's activities played a crucial role in their decline. The rise of community initiatives, such as youth clubs and boxing programs, provided alternative pathways for young people who might have otherwise been drawn into the gang life. These programs not only reduced the gang's recruitment base, but also strengthened community cohesion against criminal elements. The shift in community sentiment, bolstered by these positive interventions, created an environment less tolerant of the Peaky Blinders' presence and activities. Internally, the Peaky Blinders faced significant fractures that contributed to their downfall. The gang's leadership struggled with maintaining cohesion amongst its members. Disputes over control and influence, coupled with disagreements on strategy and operations, led to internal strife. The gang's inability to effectively manage these internal conflicts weakened their organisational structure and made them more vulnerable to external pressures. The rise of rival gangs, particularly the Birmingham Boys, further exacerbated the Peaky Blinders' troubles. They aggressively expanded their own territories and challenged the Peaky Blinders' dominance. This competition for control over criminal enterprises led to increased violence and further destabilised the Peaky Blinders' grip on power. The public perception of the Peaky Blinders also shifted significantly during this period. Initially, the gang's audacious and charismatic image had garnered a degree of public fascination. However, as their violent activities and bullying tactics became more pronounced, public opinion began to sour. The gang's involvement in brutal extortion schemes, violent confrontations, and high-profile criminal activities turned them from local anti-heroes into wisely despised figures. The increasing media coverage of their criminal activities, coupled with growing public awareness of their violent tactics, contributed to a negative shift in their public image. The combination of these factors created a perfect storm leading to the Peaky Blinders' decline. The intensified law enforcement efforts and community resistance severely curtailed their operational capabilities. Internal discord and the rise of rival gangs further undermined their power and influence. Simultaneously, the shift in public opinion from fascination to condemnation eroded the gang's support base and legitimacy. The gang's inability to adapt to these mounting pressures, coupled with their internal weaknesses and external competition, ultimately led to their downfall. By the early 20th century, the Peaky Blinders had lost much of their former influence and control. Their criminal empire, once formidable, had been dismantled through a combination of increased law enforcement actions, community resistance, and internal strife.
Why did the Peaky Blinders disappear? And it was for a number of reasons that were organic, that were not pre-planned. There was stronger policing, stronger sentencing, but that was accompanied by what we might now call social activism. So a lot of socially concerned clergymen and women were setting up what we might term as youth clubs today, often with a football team. One or two had a boxing club. Father Jay in the East End of London, in the Old Nickel, set up a boxing club. In Birmingham, it was Father Pinchard, High Church of England men. So we've got these sport clubs where they're trying to get the young lads away from the gangs early enough. Football becomes a major sport, not just to watch, but to participate in.
By the early 20th century, the Peaky Blinders' dominance in Birmingham was increasingly under threat, culminating in their decline by the time World War I began. Several factors contributed to their downfall, ranging from the growth of football as an alternative source of excitement for working class youths to a belated clampdown by the police and judiciary. Like all youth fashions, Peaky Blinders' style had a limited shelf life. In the early decades of the 20th century, young people in Birmingham, as elsewhere across Britain, began to look to Hollywood for a new sense of glamour. Had a youth dressed as a Peaky Blinders made an appearance in Birmingham in the 1920s, he would have been greeted with astonishment, although middle-aged passers-by might have chuckled in recognition. In 1936, nearly 40 years after their demise, memories of the Peaky Blinders were stirred by a series of letters published in the Notes and Queries column for the Birmingham Weekly Post. One reader had seen many a policeman and civilian alike laid out by them. In reply, born and bred Brum insisted that the Peaky Blinder was just an ordinary working class man. He could always be found at work during the day in some brass foundry, doing his bit at the lathe or vice, or perhaps as a polisher or in a casting shop. Another newspaper article stated a good many readers have a wrong conception of Peaky Blinders. Their actions were mostly restrained to rival gangs and the police. The general public was seldom interfered with unless they interfered. The article also explained how the hat that gave the Peaky his name was fashioned. It was a bowler hat with a brim made to fit the sides. Just in front of the brim came to a point, almost like the spout of a jug. This was done by wetting the brim, warming it by the fire, then making the shape required. It was worn to the side of the head to show the hair on the other side done in a quiff. The Peaky Blinders had long ceased to stalk Birmingham's tough streets, but their fashion sense and penchant for violence had guaranteed their spot in the second city's collective memory. The Peaky Blinders story serves as an historical reminder of how shifts in societal attitudes and institutional responses can lead to the decline of even the most formidable criminal enterprises. As Birmingham moved into the 20th century, the legacy of the Peaky Blinders became part of the city's past, replaced by new challenges and evolving social dynamics. The legacy of the Peaky Blinders extends beyond their criminal activities, leaving a profound impact on both history and popular culture. This notorious gang, with its distinctive fashion and criminal exploits, has become emblematic of a bygone era in Birmingham. Their story has been romanticised and sensationalised in popular culture, notably through the hit television series Peaky Blinders, which has shaped contemporary perceptions of the gang. In historical terms, the Peaky Blinders symbolise the complexities of urban crime in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Their rise and fall illustrates the dynamics of gang culture, the challenges faced by law enforcement, and the impact of socio-economic conditions on criminal behaviour. The Peaky Blinders' legacy is preserved through various historical accounts and academic studies that analyse their influence on Birmingham's social and criminal landscapes. Popular culture has played a significant role in shaping the gang's modern legacy. The TV series Peaky Blinders has brought the gang's story to a global audience, often blending historical fact with dramatic fiction. While the show has popularised the Peaky Blinders and introduced their story to a new generation, it has also contributed to the glamorisation of gang culture. The romanticised portrayal of the gang's criminal activities, stylish attire and complex characters can obscure the harsh realities of their actions and the social consequences of their behaviour. This glamorisation poses risks for modern society. By focusing on the allure of gang life, popular media can inadvertently normalise or even romanticise criminal behaviour. This can lead to a distorted perception of gang culture, potentially encouraging young people to emulate the gang's image rather than understanding the true nature of their criminal activities. The appeal of such portrayals can overshadow the serious consequences of gang involvement, including violence, crime, and the detrimental impact on communities. The lessons learned from the Peaky Blinders' rise and fall underscore the importance of addressing socio-economic conditions to prevent the emergence of similar groups today. The gang's influence was partly driven by extreme poverty, limited economic opportunities, and social disenfranchisement. Effective strategies to combat gang-related issues must include addressing these root causes. By improving socio-economic conditions, offering educational and employment opportunities, and fostering community engagement, society can mitigate factors that contribute to gang formation. Preventative measures and community programs are crucial in creating environments where young people are less likely to be drawn into criminal activities. Initiatives that provide support, mentorship, and positive alternatives can reduce the appeal of gangs and promote social cohesion. Additionally, raising awareness about the realities of gang life and the consequences of criminal behaviour can help counteract the allure created by media portrayals. The Peaky Blinders' legacy is both a historical artefact and a cautionary tale. While their story remains a captivating part of Birmingham's history, it also offers valuable insights into the consequences of glamorising gang culture and the need for proactive measures to address socio-economic disparities. Understanding their impact and learning from their story can help shape more effective approaches to preventing gang-related issues in contemporary society. The rise of the Peaky Blinders was deeply rooted in the harsh realities of Birmingham's working-class neighbourhoods in the late 19th century. Poverty, overcrowding and a lack of job opportunities pushed many young men into lives of crime as a way to gain power, money and respect. The Peaky Blinders, with their sharp dress and ruthless tactics, became symbols of defiance against a society that offered them little. However, their fall was inevitable. As law enforcement became more organised and other, more powerful gangs emerged, the Peaky Blinders couldn't maintain their dominance. The Birmingham boys, for instance, were more strategic and better connected, which allowed them to take over the criminal underworld. Today, the landscape of organised crime is vastly different. Modern gangs are often more sophisticated, using technology and global networks to operate on a scale the Peaky Blinders couldn't have imagined. But the root causes, social inequality, poverty and the search for identity, still drive many into the underworld. What has changed most is society's response, with more emphasis on crime prevention and social support, aiming to address the issues before they lead to violence and crime. As we look at the rise and fall of the Peaky Blinders, one has to wonder, have we truly learned from the past, or are we simply witnessing a new generation of desperate souls carving out their own brutal paths in the shadows of society?